Wake up. This is not a motivational speech. This is a confrontation. Your life is happening right now, not someday in the future when conditions are perfect, not when you finally have more time, more money, more confidence, or more approval. Right now. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the signal that something true has touched you. I am speaking to you as someone who has stood exactly where you are standing, feeling busy yet empty, surrounded yet alone, successful on the outside and restless on the inside. You are not lost because you lack ability. You are lost because you have been trained to look everywhere except inward. You wake up each day already tired, not because your body is weak, but because your mind is constantly negotiating with a life you do not fully respect. You rush, you scroll, you consume, you react. You tell yourself you will slow down later, live fully later, be present later. Later becomes a habit, and slowly, without drama, your days begin to blur together. Weeks pass, years pass. You are alive, but you are not awake. That is the real danger. Not failure, not struggle, sleepwalking through a life that only comes once. I am not here to flatter you. I am here to tell you the truth clearly and calmly. You do not need another technique. You do not need another shortcut. You do not need someone to save you. What you need is awareness sharp enough to cut through the noise you live in every day. The world is loud, but your confusion is louder. And the longer you avoid facing it, the more control it gains over you. You feel it when you lie down at night and the silence suddenly feels heavy. That is not boredom. That is your life asking for your attention. You have been taught to believe that happiness is something you earn after proving yourself, after achieving, after arriving. That belief keeps you running, but never arriving. You measure yourself against others who are just as confused, just as afraid, just as uncertain, only better at hiding it. You compare highlights to your behind the scenes, and each comparison quietly drains your respect for your own life. I know this because I lived it, and the moment I stopped running, everything changed. Not because my life became easier, but because it became honest. Look at how you treat your own existence. You postpone joy. You delay rest. You ignore small moments because they seem insignificant. You chase intensity instead of depth. And when life does not feel meaningful, you blame circumstances, people, luck, timing. Rarely do you question the direction you are facing. You are not unhappy because life is cruel. You are unhappy because you are disconnected from it, from yourself, from the present moment where everything real actually happens. This is where waking up begins. Not with excitement, but with responsibility. The responsibility to stop lying to yourself. The responsibility to admit that no one is coming to hand you a meaningful life. You build it. Moment by moment. Choice by choice. Attention by attention. And the first choice is to stop living on autopilot, to stop numbing yourself with distraction and calling it relaxation, to stop mistaking motion for progress, to stop confusing survival with living. I am talking to you, not as an audience member, but as a human being whose time matters. Your attention is the most valuable thing you own, and you spend it as if it were endless. It is not. Every day you wake up is a withdrawal from a finite account. You can spend it unconsciously, or you can invest it deliberately. One leads to regret, the other leads to peace, not comfort, peace, the kind that does not depend on circumstances. You do not need to reinvent your entire life today. That is another lie people tell you, and it overwhelms you into doing nothing. What you need is a shift in how you see, a decision to become present enough to notice what you have been avoiding. Your habits, your thoughts, your excuses, your patterns. Awareness is uncomfortable at first because it removes your favorite hiding places. But once you see clearly, you are no longer powerless. Clarity is the beginning of strength. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to observe yourself. Watch how often you escape the present moment. Watch how quickly you reach for distraction when silence appears. Watch how you delay important conversations with yourself. There is nothing wrong with you for doing this. It is human, but staying there is a choice, and every choice has a cost. The cost of avoidance is always paid later, with interest. This is your life, not a rehearsal, not a draft, not a warm-up round. This moment will never repeat itself, and neither will you, exactly as you are now. One day, you will look back and realize that the ordinary days were the real substance of your existence. The question is whether you were there for them, whether you showed up, whether you lived deliberately, or simply reacted until time ran out. Waking up does not mean becoming intense or dramatic. It means becoming honest. It means simplifying instead of complicating. It means choosing depth over noise, presence over performance, meaning over approval. It means accepting that life will always include discomfort, uncertainty, and effort, and deciding that none of those are reasons to check out. They are reasons to engage more fully. I am here to walk you through a way of seeing life that has endured for centuries because it works. Not because it promises pleasure, but because it builds resilience. Not because it avoids pain, but because it teaches you how to stand within it without breaking. This path does not require perfection. It requires commitment, quiet commitment, daily commitment, the kind that does not need applause. So wake up. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Wake up to your thoughts. Wake up to your time. Wake up to the fact that meaning is not found by searching harder, but by paying attention deeper. Everything that follows builds on this single moment of awareness. If you miss this, nothing else will land. If you grasp this, your life will begin to shift in ways that feel subtle at first, then undeniable. This is about your life, and it has already begun. There is a quiet emptiness that follows you through your days, and almost no one talks about it because it is difficult to explain without sounding ungrateful. From the outside, your life looks acceptable, sometimes even successful. You function, you show up, you do what is expected of you. And yet, beneath all that movement, something feels hollow. Not dramatic pain, not obvious sadness, just a dull absence, like a room that has furniture but no warmth. I know this emptiness well. It does not scream, it whispers. And because it whispers, it is easy to ignore until years have passed. This emptiness appears when you finally slow down, late at night, when the noise fades, early in the morning, before the world asks anything from you. In those moments, when there is nothing to distract you, you feel it clearly, a sense that you are living slightly off-center, that your actions and your inner values are not fully aligned. You may not lack achievement, but you lack meaning, and that absence cannot be filled with productivity, entertainment, or approval, no matter how hard you try. You were never taught to recognize this feeling. You were taught to silence it, to stay busy, to stay positive, to be grateful and move on. But emptiness does not disappear when ignored. It simply grows quieter and deeper. You start mistaking exhaustion for normal life. You normalize a constant, low-level dissatisfaction and tell yourself this is just how adulthood feels. But that belief slowly drains the color from your days until everything becomes functional and nothing feels alive. I want you to understand something important. This emptiness is not a flaw in you. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is a signal that you are more than the routine you have trapped yourself in, a signal that your inner life is asking for attention, not achievement. The mistake most people make is assuming that this feeling means something is wrong with them, when in reality it means something honest is waking up inside them. You feel empty not because you lack things, but because you lack connection. Connection to your own values, connection to the present moment, connection to a sense of purpose that goes deeper than survival and performance. When your days are filled only with obligation and distraction, your inner world begins to starve, and no amount of external success can compensate for that hunger. You can impress the world and still feel invisible to yourself. I lived for a long time believing that if I just pushed a little harder, achieved a little more, this emptiness would disappear. It never did. It only became quieter, buried under responsibility and routine. The turning point came when I stopped trying to escape the feeling and allowed myself to sit with it. Not to dramatize it, but to understand it. The emptiness was not asking me to quit my life. It was asking me to change how I was living it. Most people are terrified of this realization because it removes their excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances alone. You have to look at how you spend your attention, how often you act against your own values, how often you say yes when you mean no, how often you silence your intuition because it is inconvenient. The emptiness grows every time you betray yourself in small, seemingly harmless ways. This is why the emptiness feels so quiet. It is built from small compromises, not big disasters. You ignore your need for rest. You dismiss your need for reflection. You numb discomfort instead of learning from it. Over time, these choices create distance between who you are and how you live. And that distance is felt as emptiness, not because life is empty, but because you are not fully present in it. The world will never warn you about this. It benefits from your distraction. It rewards your busyness. It praises your endurance. But it does not care whether you feel whole. That responsibility is yours. And it begins with the courage to admit that something is missing, without immediately rushing to fill it with noise. Silence is uncomfortable because it tells the truth, but it is also where clarity begins. You do not need to label this emptiness or turn it into a problem to fix. You need to listen to it. It is pointing you toward a life that is more intentional, more grounded, more aligned with who you actually are. It is inviting you to slow down, to simplify, to choose depth over distraction. Not all at once, gradually, honestly, with patience. This emptiness is not here to destroy you. It is here to wake you up, to remind you that your life is meant to be lived consciously, not just managed efficiently. When you stop running from it, you will notice something unexpected. Beneath the emptiness, there is space. And in that space, there is possibility. Not the loud kind that promises instant change, but the quiet kind that leads to lasting peace. Do not rush past this moment. Many people do. They feel the emptiness, panic, and immediately drown it out. If you can stay here just a little longer, you will begin to understand what it is asking of you. And once you understand that, the emptiness will no longer feel like a void. It will feel like an opening. There comes a moment when everything unnecessary falls away, and only what is real remains. Not opinions, not trends, not advice that sounds good but changes nothing. Just truth. The kind you do not argue with because life keeps proving it to you over and over again. I reached that moment when I stopped running from the quiet emptiness and finally asked myself, what actually matters? What I found were not many answers, just three. Simple. uncomfortable, unavoidable. These are truths you cannot escape, no matter where you go or what you achieve, because they are woven into the structure of a meaningful life. The first truth is gratitude. Not the shallow kind you repeat out of habit, but real gratitude. The kind that changes how you see everything. I learned this the hard way. I was always reaching forward, measuring my life by what was missing instead of what was present. There was always another goal, another milestone, another version of myself I thought I needed to become before I could feel content. And in doing so, I treated the present moment like a waiting room instead of a place to live. Gratitude ended that illusion. It forced me to confront a simple reality. If I could not respect what I already had, nothing I gained would ever feel like enough. Gratitude is not pretending everything is perfect. It is recognizing what is real. It is acknowledging that you are breathing, that you are here, that you have survived everything that once felt unbearable. When I stopped rushing past these facts, my relationship with life changed. I no longer felt poor inside, even when circumstances were imperfect. I realized that the feeling of lack was not created by my situation, but by my constant craving for something else. Gratitude cut that craving at its root. It grounded me. It taught me to stand firmly where I was, instead of leaning endlessly into the future. The second truth is acceptance. This one is often misunderstood, and because of that, it is often resisted. Acceptance does not mean weakness. It does not mean giving up or approving of everything that happens. It means seeing reality clearly, without demanding that it be different before you allow yourself peace. I spent years fighting life, as if it had made a mistake by not matching my expectations. I wanted certainty where there was none, control where there was chaos, comfort where growth was required. That resistance exhausted me. It turned normal challenges into personal battles. When I finally learned acceptance, something unexpected happened. Life did not become easier, but it became lighter. I stopped wasting energy arguing with what I could not change and began directing that energy toward what I could. Acceptance taught me that pain is often unavoidable, but suffering is optional. Suffering begins the moment you refuse to accept what is happening and demand a different reality. When I let go of that demand, I found space. Space to breathe. Space to respond wisely instead of reacting emotionally. Space to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. Acceptance also brought humility. It reminded me that I am not the center of the universe and that life does not exist to meet my preferences. That realization did not diminish me. It freed me. I no longer needed to control everything to feel safe. I learned to work with reality instead of against it. And in that cooperation, I found stability. Not the fragile kind that depends on everything going my way, but the steady kind that remains even when things fall apart. The third truth is love. This one is the most misunderstood of all, because it has been reduced to emotion instead of principle. Love is not just what you feel, it is how you choose to treat yourself, others, and life itself. For a long time, I lived in quiet self-judgment. I was harsh with myself, impatient with my flaws, and constantly measuring my worth by my performance. That inner hostility shaped everything. It made success feel empty and failure feel unbearable. I realized that no philosophy, no discipline, no achievement could compensate for a lack of self-respect. Love begins with how you speak to yourself when no one is listening. It is the decision to stop treating yourself as a problem, to fix and start treating yourself as a human being in progress. When I practiced that, my actions changed naturally. I took better care of my time. I chose relationships more carefully. I stopped chasing approval and started building integrity. Love, in this sense, was not soft. It was demanding. It required honesty, boundaries, and courage. Love also extended outward. When I stopped fighting myself, I stopped needing to fight the world. I became more patient, more understanding, less reactive. Not because people suddenly became easier, but because my inner state was no longer at war. Love created connection. Not dependency, but genuine connection rooted in respect. And through that connection, life felt fuller, even when it was challenging. These three truths are inseparable. Gratitude grounds you in the present. Acceptance stabilizes you within reality. Love gives meaning to your actions. Remove one, and the structure collapses. Together, they form a way of living that does not depend on constant achievement or external validation. They do not promise a life without pain. They promise a life without unnecessary suffering. I am not sharing these truths as ideas to admire. I am sharing them as realities you will encounter whether you acknowledge them or not. You can learn them consciously, or life will teach them to you through exhaustion, disappointment, and loss. I chose to learn them consciously, and once I did, everything that follows became possible. More will never be enough, and I learned that only after chasing it long enough to feel exhausted by the pursuit. I believed, like most people do, that satisfaction lived one step ahead of me. One more achievement, one more improvement, one more upgrade, and then I would finally relax. Then I would feel complete. But every time I reached the next milestone, the feeling faded faster than I expected. The goalpost moved. The hunger returned. What I mistook for ambition was actually dissatisfaction, wearing a respectable mask. And until I understood gratitude, that cycle never stopped. Gratitude is often misunderstood as passive acceptance or forced positivity. But that misunderstanding keeps people trapped. Real gratitude is sharp. It is honest. It does not deny hardship or pretend that everything is fine. It simply refuses to overlook what is already real and present. When I lacked gratitude, I lived as if my current life were a temporary inconvenience, something to endure until a better version arrived. That mindset quietly robbed me of peace. I was always preparing to live, never actually living, and no amount of progress could fix that, because the problem was not my situation, it was my perception. I began to notice something uncomfortable. The people who always wanted more were rarely satisfied. Even when they had more than enough, they lived in comparison, measuring their lives against others and against imagined futures. I saw that pattern in myself. Every desire fulfilled only created room for another desire. More income led to more expectation. More recognition led to more pressure. More comfort led to more fear of losing it. More never delivered peace, because peace was never its purpose. More is endless by design. Gratitude, on the other hand, has an ending point. It arrives when you stop and acknowledge what already exists. Gratitude changed the way I experienced ordinary moments. I stopped rushing through my days as if they were obstacles to overcome. I began to notice small, grounded realities. Breathing without pain, waking up with clarity, having the ability to choose. These things sound insignificant until they are gone. Gratitude sharpened my awareness of how much I had been overlooking, and the more I noticed, the less I felt deprived. This did not make me complacent. It made me stable. From that stability, ambition became healthier, no longer driven by emptiness, but by purpose. The absence of gratitude creates a subtle poverty of the mind. You may appear successful, but internally you feel behind, incomplete, always chasing. That poverty is exhausting because it never rests. Gratitude interrupts that restlessness. It anchors you in the present without trapping you there. When I practiced gratitude deliberately, I stopped resenting the present moment. I stopped treating today as something to escape. That alone reduced more stress than any external improvement ever did. My nervous system calmed, not because life was perfect, but because I was no longer at war with what I already had. Gratitude also exposed an uncomfortable truth. Much of my dissatisfaction came from entitlement. I expected life to constantly deliver improvement without fully appreciating what had already been given. When expectations rise faster than appreciation, frustration becomes inevitable. Gratitude corrected that imbalance. It reminded me that nothing in life is owed, and everything meaningful is temporary. That awareness did not make life bleak. It made it precious. When you realize that what you have can disappear, you stop postponing appreciation. You stop waiting for ideal conditions to feel content. This is why more will never be enough. More feeds desire, not fulfillment. Gratitude feeds fulfillment directly. You can build endlessly on a foundation of dissatisfaction and still feel unstable. Or you can build carefully on a foundation of gratitude and feel grounded even as you grow. I chose the second path, not because it was easier, but because it was sustainable. Gratitude did not lower my standards. It raised my awareness. And with that awareness came a quieter, steadier sense of well-being that no external upgrade had ever provided. Gratitude is not a one-time realization. It is a discipline. Some days it comes naturally. Other days it requires intention. But every day, it reshapes how you experience your own life. When you practice it, you stop asking why you do not have more and start asking how to live well with what is already here. That question changes everything. It transforms striving into direction and desire into meaning. And once you understand this, the endless chase for more loses its grip. You are no longer running toward happiness. You are standing within it. Reality does not need your permission to exist, yet I spent years arguing with it as if resistance could somehow bend it in my favor. I fought what happened, what people did, what I felt, and even who I was in certain seasons of my life. I believed that if I pushed hard enough, complained long enough, or worried deeply enough, reality would eventually correct itself. It never did. What changed instead was my level of exhaustion. Fighting reality drained my energy, distorted my judgment, and quietly multiplied my suffering. Acceptance was not something I learned easily. It was something I learned because resistance finally became unbearable. Acceptance is often mistaken for surrender, but that misunderstanding keeps people trapped. Acceptance is not giving up. It is giving up the illusion that things must be different before you can move forward. When I stopped demanding that life meet my expectations, I began to see it clearly. Clear vision changed everything. I realized that most of my pain was not created by events themselves, but by my refusal to accept them. I wanted certainty where none existed. I wanted fairness where life offered randomness. I wanted comfort where growth was required. That constant demand created tension, and tension became suffering. The moment I accepted reality as it was, not as I wished it to be, something inside me relaxed. Not because the situation improved, but because my mind stopped wasting energy on denial. Acceptance removed the second layer of pain, the layer I had been adding myself. Pain may be unavoidable at times, but suffering grows when you insist that pain should not exist. Acceptance breaks that cycle. It allows pain to pass through without turning into bitterness, resentment, or self-pity. I learned that acceptance begins with honesty, honest acknowledgement of what is happening, without exaggeration and without minimization. When I said to myself, "This is the situation, this is how it feels, this is what I can and cannot control," clarity replaced chaos. I stopped arguing with facts. I stopped replaying the same mental complaints. Instead, I focused on response. Acceptance does not remove responsibility. It redirects it. When you accept reality, you regain the ability to act effectively within it. Fighting reality is exhausting because it asks you to maintain an impossible position. You cannot outthink uncertainty or outmaneuver impermanence. Life changes, people change, circumstances shift. When I resisted that truth, I lived in constant frustration. When I accepted it, I became adaptable. Acceptance taught me to cooperate with life rather than oppose it. Cooperation is not weakness, it is intelligence. It allows you to move with conditions instead of being crushed by them. Acceptance also revealed how much of my stress came from control. I wanted outcomes. I wanted guarantees. I wanted reassurance that my effort would always be rewarded. Reality offered none of that. Acceptance taught me to focus on what was within my influence and release what was not. That separation brought calm. I stopped micromanaging the future and started engaging fully with the present. I found stability, not in certainty, but in flexibility. One of the hardest parts of acceptance was accepting myself, my limitations, my mistakes, my past choices. I used to fight these relentlessly, believing that self-criticism would somehow make me better. It only made me tense. Acceptance did not mean approval. It meant recognition. I acknowledged where I was without adding shame. From that place, improvement became possible. Growth requires a stable starting point, and acceptance provides it. Acceptance also changed how I dealt with other people. I stopped expecting them to behave according to my standards or timelines. I stopped taking everything personally. When I accepted that people act based on their own understanding, fears, and limitations, my anger softened. I became less reactive and more discerning. Acceptance gave me emotional distance, not detachment, but clarity. I could respond without being consumed. Reality does not become kinder when you accept it, but you become stronger. You stop wasting strength on resistance and start using it for action. Acceptance creates space. Space to think clearly. Space to choose wisely. Space to endure without hardening. When I embraced acceptance, my life did not become perfect, but it became manageable. And from manageable, it became meaningful. This is why acceptance matters. It is the foundation of peace. Not passive peace, but grounded peace. The kind that remains even when circumstances are unstable. When you stop fighting reality, you stop fighting yourself. And when that inner conflict ends, your energy returns. You see more clearly. You move more deliberately. You live with less friction and more intention. Acceptance is not a single decision. It is a daily practice. Each day presents moments where reality does not match your preference. Each moment is an invitation to resist or accept. Resistance promises control and delivers frustration. Acceptance offers clarity and delivers strength. I learned to choose acceptance not because it was easy, but because it was honest. And honesty is the only ground solid enough to build a life on. Love does not begin with romance, approval, or how others treat you. It begins with how you treat yourself when no one is watching. I spent a long time believing that love was something external, something to be earned through performance, discipline, or usefulness. I thought if I worked harder, became better, more impressive, more controlled, then I would finally deserve kindness, even from myself. That belief shaped the way I lived. It made me strict, impatient, and quietly cruel toward my own inner life. I did not realize that I was trying to build a meaningful life on a foundation of self-rejection. The way you speak to yourself matters more than you want to admit. That inner voice follows you everywhere. It comments on your failures, measures your worth, and interprets every mistake. When that voice is harsh, nothing you achieve will ever feel enough. I lived with that voice for years, thinking it was discipline, thinking it was strength. In reality, it was fear disguised as control. Fear of not being enough, fear of slowing down, fear of being seen as weak. That fear poisoned even my successes, because no achievement could silence it for long. Love begins when you stop treating yourself as a problem to solve and start treating yourself as a human being to understand. This does not mean indulgence. It does not mean lowering standards or avoiding responsibility. It means recognizing that growth cannot come from constant self-attack. When you speak to yourself with respect, your actions change naturally. You make better choices not because you are afraid, but because you care. That shift is subtle, but it is transformative. I noticed that the moment I stopped insulting myself internally, my energy returned. I was no longer exhausted by my own mind. Self-love is not about feeling good all the time. It is about being honest without being destructive. When I made mistakes, I used to replay them endlessly, turning one error into a full verdict on my character. Love taught me to separate behavior from identity. I could acknowledge what went wrong without turning it into proof that I was fundamentally flawed. That distinction created emotional stability. From stability, learning became possible. Shame blocks growth. Respect invites it. How you treat yourself determines how you allow others to treat you. When I was harsh with myself, I tolerated disrespect from others without realizing it. I overextended, overgave, and overexplained. I confused self-sacrifice with virtue. Love taught me boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are clarity. When I respected my own time, energy, and values, I stopped needing validation from people who could not offer it. My relationships became fewer, but deeper, quieter, but more real. Love also reshaped my ambition. Before, I chased goals to prove something, to justify my existence, to outrun my own doubt. That kind of ambition is restless and fragile. When I began treating myself with respect, ambition changed its tone. It became focused, patient, and intentional. I still wanted to grow, but growth was no longer an escape. It was an expression of alignment. I was no longer trying to become someone else. I was refining who I already was. One of the most difficult lessons was learning to rest without guilt. I had equated rest with laziness and worth with productivity. Love challenged that equation. It reminded me that a depleted mind cannot build a meaningful life. When I allowed myself to rest intentionally, without self-judgment, my clarity improved. My creativity returned. My decisions became calmer. Rest was no longer avoidance. It became maintenance. Love understands limits. Fear ignores them until collapse forces attention. Treating yourself with love also means holding yourself accountable in a fair way. Love does not excuse destructive behavior. It addresses it directly, without cruelty. When I avoided responsibility, I was not practicing love. I was practicing denial. Love required me to face uncomfortable truths about my habits, my priorities, and my excuses. But it did so without humiliation. That balance between honesty and compassion is what makes real change sustainable. The way you treat yourself sets the tone for your entire life. If you approach yourself with hostility, the world feels hostile. If you approach yourself with patience, the world feels manageable. This is not because reality changes, but because your internal environment does. I noticed that when I softened my inner posture, Challenges felt less threatening. I could engage with difficulty without collapsing or becoming defensive. Love created resilience, not fragility. Self-love is practiced in small, consistent ways. Choosing sleep over constant stimulation. Choosing honesty over performance. Choosing alignment over approval. These choices accumulate quietly. Over time, they create a sense of inner safety that no external success can replace. That safety becomes the ground you stand on when life becomes uncertain, and life will become uncertain. Love prepares you for that reality instead of pretending it will not happen. When you treat yourself with love, you stop asking the world to complete you. You stop demanding that others fix your emptiness. You arrive in your life whole, responsible, and grounded. From that place, connection becomes possible without dependence. Contribution becomes possible without self-erasure. Growth becomes possible without self-hate. Love begins with how you treat yourself, because you are the one person you cannot escape. If that relationship is hostile, everything else will feel unstable. If that relationship is respectful, life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. And clarity is what allows you to live with integrity, strength, and quiet confidence. Happiness is not waiting for you somewhere ahead. And the sooner you understand this, the less time you will waste chasing shadows. I spent years believing that happiness was an arrival point, a finish line I would cross after enough effort, success, and improvement. I told myself that once things settled, once problems were solved, once I became a better version of myself, then happiness would finally begin. That belief kept me moving, but it never let me rest. Every time I reached what I thought was the destination, the feeling was brief, fragile, and quickly replaced by the next demand. I was always almost there, and almost there slowly became nowhere. The idea that happiness is a destination is one of the most convincing illusions of modern life. It gives you hope, but it also keeps you dissatisfied. It trains your mind to live in the future and tolerate the present instead of inhabiting it. When happiness is treated as a reward, today becomes a sacrifice. You endure your days instead of living them. You rush through moments that will never return, believing they are merely stepping stones. I lived like that for a long time, and the cost was subtle but enormous. I lost depth. I lost presence. I lost my ability to feel grounded where I was. Happiness, I eventually realized, is not something you reach. It is something you practice. It lives in how you walk through your days, not in where those days eventually lead. When I stopped asking when I would be happy and started asking how I was living, everything shifted. The question was no longer about outcomes, but about alignment. Was I living in a way that respected my values? Was I present in my own life? Was I paying attention to what mattered instead of constantly preparing for something else? Those questions did more for my well-being than any achievement ever did. The problem with chasing happiness is that it conditions you to delay fulfillment. You tell yourself that peace will come later, after circumstances improve. But circumstances are never stable for long. There is always another challenge, another responsibility, another uncertainty. If happiness depends on perfect conditions, it will always remain out of reach. I learned that happiness does not require the absence of difficulty. It requires the presence of meaning, and meaning is created through engagement, not avoidance. When I accepted that happiness was not a destination, I stopped trying to escape discomfort. I stopped viewing challenges as interruptions to my happiness, and started seeing them as part of a complete life. This did not make life easier, but it made it more coherent. I was no longer waiting for a different chapter to begin before allowing myself to feel at peace. I brought attention and intention into the chapter I was already living. That alone changed the quality of my experience. Happiness is not a constant emotional high. Expecting it to be is another trap. Life includes fatigue, frustration, grief, and uncertainty. When I expected happiness to feel good all the time, I interpreted every low moment as failure. That created anxiety and self-doubt. When I understood happiness as a way of relating to life rather than a mood, those low moments lost their power. I could experience difficulty without concluding that something was wrong. I could feel sadness without feeling broken. Happiness became quieter, steadier, and more durable. Living as if happiness is a destination also encourages comparison. You look at others and assume they have arrived where you have not. You imagine that their lives are complete while yours is still unfinished. That comparison erodes gratitude and replaces it with envy. When I stopped measuring my life against imagined endpoints, I felt relief. I was no longer racing anyone. I was living my own pace. Happiness became personal instead of competitive. Happiness is built in ordinary moments, in how you speak to yourself, in how you respond to setbacks, in how honestly you live. These moments are easy to dismiss because they lack drama, but they shape your inner life more than any milestone ever could. When I slowed down enough to notice them, I realized that happiness had been available all along. Not as excitement, but as quiet contentment. Not as escape, but as presence. This understanding changed how I planned my life. I still set goals. I still worked hard. But I stopped believing that my worth and well-being were on hold until those goals were achieved. I allowed myself to feel grounded even while striving. Progress no longer came from dissatisfaction, but from direction. I was moving forward without running away from where I stood. That balance made effort sustainable instead of exhausting. Happiness is not something you stumble upon at the end of a long road. It is something you cultivate as you walk. It grows when your actions align with your values, when your attention rests in the present, and when you accept life as it unfolds instead of demanding that it conform to your expectations. This does not remove pain from life, but it prevents pain from turning into bitterness. It does not eliminate struggle, but it gives struggle context and meaning. Once I stopped treating happiness as a destination, time slowed down. Days felt fuller. Moments felt real again. I was no longer waiting for my life to begin. I was already in it. And that realization did not come with fireworks or celebration. It came with calm. The calm of no longer being in a hurry to arrive somewhere else. The calm of finally understanding that the way I live each day is the happiness I was searching for. You take life too seriously, and it is costing you more than you realize. I know this because I did the same thing. I carried my days like a heavy burden, treating every problem as a verdict and every mistake as evidence against myself. I believed seriousness was maturity, that tension meant responsibility, and that laughter was something reserved for people who did not understand how difficult life really was. What I did not see was how that constant gravity was slowly draining my energy and narrowing my perspective. I was not becoming stronger. I was becoming rigid. Seriousness feels productive, but often it is just fear in formal clothing. Fear of being judged, fear of losing control, fear of appearing foolish or unprepared. When you take life too seriously, you are always on guard, always bracing for impact. That posture might help you survive, but it does not help you live. I spent years like this, believing that if I loosened my grip even slightly, everything would fall apart. The truth was the opposite. The tighter I held on, the more fragile I became. Laughter entered my life, not as entertainment, but as relief. At first, it felt almost inappropriate. How could I laugh when there was so much to worry about? But the more I paid attention, the more I realized that laughter was not denial. It was perspective. It reminded me that I was still human inside the roles, responsibilities, and expectations I carried. Laughter did not erase my problems. It changed my relationship with them. Suddenly, challenges felt lighter, not because they disappeared, but because they no longer defined me. When you laugh, you create distance between yourself and the story your mind is constantly telling. That story is usually dramatic, urgent, and exaggerated. It turns minor setbacks into personal failures and temporary discomfort into permanent disaster. Laughter interrupts that narrative. It says, "This moment does not own me. I can see it clearly without being consumed by it." That shift is powerful. It restores flexibility to your thinking and softness to your emotional life. I noticed that the people who could laugh at themselves recovered faster from mistakes. They learned quicker. They moved on instead of replaying the same scene over and over. When I finally allowed myself to laugh at my own imperfections, something unexpected happened. Shame lost its grip. I was no longer trying to appear flawless. I was trying to be real. That authenticity made life easier to carry. I could admit confusion without feeling weak. I could acknowledge failure without collapsing. Taking life too seriously also isolates you. It builds walls around your inner world. You become guarded, careful, distant. Laughter breaks those walls naturally. It connects you to others without effort. It signals openness. When I laughed more freely, my relationships changed. Conversations became lighter, but also deeper. People felt safer around me, and I felt safer with myself. Laughter reminded me that connection does not require perfection. It requires presence. There is a misconception that laughter undermines discipline or focus. I believed that for a long time. I thought that if I allowed myself to relax, I would lose my edge. What actually happened was the opposite. When I laughed more, my mind became clearer. Stress loosened its grip. I could focus without tension. I was no longer burning energy, maintaining a serious facade. Laughter restored balance. It made effort sustainable instead of draining. Life is unpredictable by nature. You can prepare, plan, and work hard, but uncertainty will always remain. When you approach life with excessive seriousness, uncertainty feels threatening. When you allow humor into your perspective, uncertainty becomes manageable. You realize that you do not need to control everything to be okay. You need resilience, adaptability, and the ability to recover. Laughter strengthens all three. It helps you bounce back instead of breaking under pressure. Learning to laugh does not mean trivializing what matters. It means refusing to let everything feel heavy all the time. It means recognizing that many of the things you stress about will not matter as much as they seem right now. When I learned to laugh in difficult moments, not mockingly, but gently, I found calm where there used to be tension. I could face reality without hostility. I could acknowledge difficulty without amplifying it. You were not meant to carry life with clenched teeth and a closed heart. You were meant to engage with it fully, including its absurdity. There is something profoundly grounding about recognizing how strange and imperfect existence can be. Laughter arises naturally when you stop demanding that everything makes sense and start allowing life to unfold. That allowance creates space. In that space, you breathe again. Laughter is a choice, especially when it does not come easily. You can choose to see the humor in your own mistakes, the irony in setbacks, the lightness hidden inside tension. This choice does not deny responsibility. It restores proportion. It reminds you that you are more than your current problem and bigger than your current fear. Each time you laugh, even quietly, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. When you take life less seriously, you do not become careless. You become resilient. You stop treating every moment as a test and start treating it as an experience. That shift transforms how you move through your days. You are still committed. You still care, but you are no longer crushed by the weight of expectation. You stand upright, flexible, and awake. Learning to laugh saved me from myself. It softened my edges without dulling my purpose. It reminded me that a meaningful life is not built on constant intensity, but on balance, effort, and ease, focus and play, discipline and release. When you learn to laugh, you do not lose control. You gain perspective. And with perspective, life becomes not easier, but far more livable. Stress does not arrive loudly. It builds quietly, tightening your shoulders, shortening your breath, narrowing your thinking until everything feels urgent and heavy. I lived under that weight for a long time without realizing how much it was shaping my reactions. I told myself stress was the price of responsibility. That tension meant I was doing something important with my life. I wore it like a badge of honor. But inside, my body was exhausted, and my mind was constantly bracing for the next impact. What I did not understand then was that stress feeds on seriousness. And one of the simplest ways to weaken it is laughter. Laughter is rarely treated as a serious tool, which is exactly why its power is overlooked. I used to think laughter was a distraction, something that took me away from problems instead of helping me deal with them. But over time, I noticed something undeniable. On the days I laughed, even briefly, my stress did not disappear, but it lost its authority. It stopped commanding my entire nervous system. My thoughts became less frantic. My reactions softened. Laughter did not solve my problems, but it gave me enough distance from them to respond instead of react. Stress thrives when your mind believes everything is a threat. Deadlines feel like danger. Mistakes feel like disaster. Uncertainty feels unbearable. Laughter interrupts that false alarm system. It tells your body that you are safe in this moment, even if things are not perfect. When you laugh, your breathing deepens naturally. Your muscles release tension without instruction. Your mind pauses its endless calculations. For a brief moment, you return to the present. And that return is powerful. Stress cannot dominate a mind that has stepped back into awareness. I began to see laughter as a reset rather than an escape. It resets perspective. When you laugh, you remind yourself that life is larger than the current pressure you are under. You remember that you have survived difficulty before. You remember that not everything requires immediate resolution. That memory alone reduces stress more effectively than endless analysis. I stopped asking myself how to eliminate stress entirely and started asking how to prevent it from consuming me. Laughter became one of my most reliable answers. There is a physical intelligence in laughter that the mind often ignores. Your body responds to laughter instinctively, releasing chemicals that counteract stress responses. I did not need to understand the biology to feel the effect. After laughing, even briefly, my body felt lighter. My thoughts slowed. Sleep came more easily. Stress, which once lingered for days, began to pass through more quickly. It no longer settled into my system and made itself at home. Laughter taught my body that tension was temporary. One of the most important lessons I learned was that laughter does not have to be spontaneous to be effective. Waiting until you feel like laughing is often waiting too long. Sometimes laughter is a deliberate choice, a decision to find humor in the absurdity of your own overthinking. A willingness to smile at the fact that you are taking this moment far more seriously than it deserves. At first, this felt unnatural, almost forced. But with time, it became easier, and the effects were real. Stress lost its grip faster when I chose lightness instead of resistance. Stress also isolates you. It turns your attention inward, and convinces you that you are alone with your pressure. Laughter breaks that isolation. Shared laughter, especially, reminds you that others are struggling too, that imperfection is universal, and that connection exists even in difficulty. When I laughed with others during stressful periods, I felt supported without needing solutions. That support did not remove responsibility, but it made responsibility bearable. Stress weakens when you realize you are not carrying everything alone. I noticed that laughter changed how long stress stayed with me. Before, one stressful event could dominate my mood for an entire day or longer. After learning to use laughter intentionally, stress became shorter-lived. It still arrived, but it did not linger. I could acknowledge it, respond appropriately, and then release it. That ability to release is crucial. Stress becomes damaging not because it appears, but because it stays. Laughter helps it move through instead of settling in. Using laughter as a tool does not mean mocking serious situations or dismissing genuine hardship. It means refusing to let stress define your identity. It means recognizing that you are bigger than the pressure you are under. When I laughed in difficult moments, it was not because I did not care. It was because I cared enough to protect my clarity. Stress clouds judgment. Laughter clears it. And clear judgment is what allows you to act wisely under pressure. I began to notice how often my stress came from imagined futures rather than present realities. My mind would race ahead, constructing worst-case scenarios and reacting to them as if they were already happening. Laughter pulled me back. It exposed the exaggeration. It reminded me that I was responding to a story, not a fact. That awareness reduced stress immediately. I could focus on what was actually in front of me instead of everything that might go wrong later. Laughter also restored a sense of proportion. Not everything deserves the same level of emotional investment. Stress flattens importance, making everything feel equally urgent. Laughter reintroduces hierarchy. It helps you see what truly matters and what can wait. When I laughed at small inconveniences instead of tightening around them, I saved my energy for challenges that genuinely required it. This selective seriousness made me more effective, not less. Over time, laughter became a quiet form of resilience. It did not make life easy, but it made it sustainable. I stopped burning myself out, trying to control every outcome. I allowed myself moments of lightness without guilt. Those moments accumulated. They softened my inner world. Stress still visited, but it no longer ruled. I had found a way to coexist with pressure without being crushed by it. Laughter is not a cure for stress, but it is a powerful counterbalance. It reminds you that you are alive, adaptable, and capable of recovery. When you laugh, you reclaim your nervous system from constant alert. You remind yourself that you are more than your responsibilities, more than your worries, more than the weight you carry. And in that reminder, stress loses its authority. This is why laughter is a hidden weapon. It is quiet. It is simple. It does not demand effort or explanation. But used consistently, it changes how stress lives inside you. It gives you space to breathe, think, and respond with intention. And in a life filled with pressure, that space is not a luxury. You were not built to live indoors, yet most of your days pass under artificial light, surrounded by walls, screens, and constant noise. I lived like that for years and called it normal. I told myself this was modern life, that adaptation meant endurance, but something inside me felt compressed, as if my mind were breathing recycled air. The longer I stayed inside, the smaller my thoughts became. Problems felt heavier. Time felt tighter. I did not realize how much my environment was shaping my inner state until I stepped outside and felt my body respond before my mind could argue. The human body remembers what the modern schedule forgets. We evolved under open skies, changing light, wind on skin, and ground beneath our feet. When those signals disappear, the nervous system stays alert, confused, overstimulated. Indoors, everything is controlled, flat, predictable, yet mentally exhausting. Outdoors, nothing is controlled, yet the mind relaxes. I noticed this contrast immediately. A short walk outside did what hours of thinking could not. It loosened tension without effort. It returned scale to my worries. What felt overwhelming indoors felt manageable under the open sky. Living indoors too much trains your attention to fragment. Screens demand constant focus shifts. Notifications interrupt thought before it settles. Artificial environments keep the mind busy but unfulfilled. Outside, attention widens. You notice distance, movement, sound, light. The mind stops gripping so tightly. When I began spending time outdoors deliberately, I felt my thoughts slow down. Not dull, but clear. Decisions became simpler because my nervous system was no longer overloaded. I could think again without forcing it. Nature does not rush, yet nothing is wasted. That lesson changed how I approached my own pace. Indoors, urgency feels constant. There is always something demanding response. Outside, time stretches naturally. You realize that not everything requires immediate action. Watching clouds move or trees sway recalibrates your sense of urgency. I learned that much of my stress came from a distorted sense of time, not from actual pressure. Stepping outside corrected that distortion without instruction. Being outdoors also restored my relationship with my body. Indoors, I lived mostly in my head, analyzing, planning, worrying. Outside, my body re-entered the conversation. Breathing deepened, posture adjusted, movement became natural instead of forced. I realized how often I had ignored physical signals until they turned into discomfort. Outside, those signals softened. The body felt included again. That inclusion reduced mental fatigue more effectively than rest alone. You do not need wilderness to experience this shift. Even small exposures matter. A quiet street, a patch of trees, open air through a window. The nervous system responds quickly. I stopped treating outdoor time as optional or recreational and started treating it as maintenance. Just as sleep repairs the body, time outside repairs perception. It reminds you that life is larger than your schedule and deeper than your inbox. That reminder is stabilizing. Indoors, you measure yourself constantly. Productivity, performance, comparison. Outside, those measurements lose relevance. A tree does not compete. The sky does not rush. When I spent time outdoors, I felt less pressure to prove anything. That relief was not laziness. It was perspective. I returned to my responsibilities with more patience and better judgment because I was no longer operating from chronic tension. Nature also teaches acceptance quietly. Weather changes, light fades, seasons turn. There is no resistance, only movement. Being around that rhythm trained me to stop fighting impermanence in my own life. I began to accept change without panic, loss without bitterness, uncertainty without collapse. Indoors, change feels disruptive. Outdoors, it feels natural. That shift reshaped how I responded to difficulty. Living indoors too much narrows imagination. Everything becomes utilitarian. Outside, imagination expands without effort. The mind wanders productively. Insights appear unexpectedly. I stopped forcing creativity and started allowing it. Many of my clearest thoughts arrived while walking without a destination, simply present with my surroundings. Nature created mental space where ideas could breathe. I also noticed how quickly mood improved outdoors. Not excitement, but steadiness. A calm baseline returned. This steadiness mattered more than temporary pleasure. It made discipline easier. It made patience natural. When your inner state is regulated, effort feels lighter. You stop pushing against yourself. That internal cooperation is essential for sustainable growth. You were not designed to live sealed off from the elements, disconnected from natural signals. Indoors has its place, but it cannot replace what open space provides. When you ignore that truth, your mind pays the price. When you honor it, clarity returns. I learned to step outside not to escape life, but to re-enter it properly. Make space for the outdoors, not as a reward, but as a foundation. Let your senses reset. Let your thoughts widen. Let your body remember its rhythm. You will notice problems shrinking, not because they disappear, but because you regain proportion. You will feel less trapped in your own head, less pressured by imagined urgency, more capable of choosing wisely. You were not built to live indoors because you were built to live fully. Under light that changes, air that moves, ground that reminds you where you stand. Step outside and let your system recalibrate. The world is not waiting to overwhelm you. It is waiting to steady you. When you align with nature, peace stops feeling like something you have to chase and starts feeling like something you remember. I discovered this, not through theory, but through contrast. I noticed how restless I became when my days were driven entirely by artificial rhythms, deadlines detached from daylight, sleep disconnected from darkness, attention fragmented by constant stimulation. My mind felt sharp but brittle. My emotions felt controlled but tense. It was only when I began to move in rhythm with the natural world that my inner noise softened. Nature did not give me answers. It gave me balance, and balance was enough. Alignment with nature begins when you stop demanding that life move at your pace. Indoors, everything responds instantly. Lights turn on, screens refresh, information arrives without effort. That convenience trains impatience. Outdoors, nothing rushes. Light changes gradually. Weather shifts without consulting your plans. Growth happens invisibly before it becomes visible. Spending time in that environment recalibrated my expectations. I stopped expecting immediate resolution from every effort. I learned to allow processes to unfold. That allowance reduced frustration more effectively than control ever did. Peace is not created by eliminating disturbance. It is created by learning how to stand within it without losing center. Nature teaches this effortlessly. Wind moves, yet trees remain rooted. Water flows around obstacles instead of fighting them. Seasons change without resistance. Observing these patterns changed how I related to difficulty. I stopped treating challenges as interruptions and started seeing them as movements within a larger rhythm. That shift dissolved much of my anxiety. Problems did not disappear, but they stopped feeling personal and overwhelming. When I aligned with nature, my sense of time changed. Indoors, time felt compressed, urgent, always running out. Outdoors, time expanded. Minutes felt fuller. Moments had texture. This was not nostalgia or fantasy. It was presence. Nature anchored me in what was happening now instead of what might happen next. That anchoring calmed my mind. I could plan without panic and act without haste. Peace emerged naturally from that grounded attention. Alignment also meant respecting natural limits, especially my own. I stopped forcing productivity when my energy was depleted. I paid attention to cycles of focus and rest. Nature never demands constant output. Growth happens in waves. Rest is built into every system. When I ignored that truth, burnout followed. When I honored it, my work became steadier and more meaningful. Peace was no longer something I postponed until exhaustion forced it. It became part of how I lived. I noticed how quickly my emotional state stabilized when I spent time aligning with natural rhythms. Morning light brought clarity. Evening darkness invited reflection. Quiet environments reduced reactivity. My nervous system responded before my thoughts could interfere. This response was not dramatic, but it was consistent. Over time, consistency mattered more than intensity. Peace grew not from rare moments of escape, but from repeated moments of alignment. Nature also stripped away unnecessary complexity. Indoors, I overthought. I analyzed feelings until they lost shape. Outside, things were simpler. There was temperature, movement, sound. Experience replaced interpretation. That simplicity was grounding. It reminded me that many of my mental struggles were created by excessive abstraction. Nature returned me to direct experience. From there, clarity followed. Aligning with nature did not require isolation or retreat. It required attention. Attention to light, air, movement, and stillness. Even brief moments mattered. A walk without headphones, sitting quietly at dusk, feeling weather instead of avoiding it. These small acts accumulated. They changed how my body processed stress and how my mind framed problems. Peace did not arrive all at once. It settled gradually, like sediment sinking in clear water. Nature also taught humility. It reminded me that my concerns, while important to me, were not the center of existence. That perspective was relieving, not diminishing. It reduced the pressure I placed on every decision. I could care deeply without inflating consequences. Peace grew from that proportional thinking. When you realize that life continues regardless of your anxiety, you stop believing that worry is a form of responsibility. Aligning with nature meant accepting impermanence. Leaves fall, light fades. Nothing holds its shape forever. Resisting this truth creates tension. Accepting it creates peace. I learned to let moments pass without clinging. Success without attachment. Difficulty without despair. Nature modeled this constantly. Watching it taught me to release my grip on outcomes and focus on conduct instead. That focus stabilized my inner world. Peace is not passive. It is active alignment. It is the result of living in accordance with realities larger than your preferences. Nature offers those realities freely. When you align with them, you stop fighting what cannot be controlled and start cooperating with what can. That cooperation is where peace lives. I did not find peace by withdrawing from life. I found it by stepping into life more honestly, guided by rhythms older than ambition and wiser than urgency. Aligning with nature returned me to myself. It reminded me how to breathe, how to wait, how to move forward without force. Peace was not something new I acquired. It was something familiar I stopped resisting. When you align with nature, peace does not announce itself. It settles quietly. It shows up as steadiness instead of excitement, as clarity instead of certainty, as resilience instead of comfort. And once you feel it, you understand that it was always available, waiting for you to slow down enough to meet it. Winning your life begins in the morning, not because mornings are magical, but because they are quiet enough to tell the truth. I used to believe that waking up early was a personality trait, something you either had or did not. I told myself I was simply not built for mornings, that my real energy came later. What I did not realize was that I had trained myself to start each day in reaction mode. I opened my eyes already behind, already responding, already surrendering control before I even stood up. The morning was deciding my life before I ever chose it. The first moments after waking shape everything that follows. In the morning, your mind is still impressionable. It has not yet been overwhelmed by demands, opinions, or urgency. When you give that moment away to noise, you give away your direction. When you give away your direction, I learned this slowly, after years of starting my days rushed and unfocused. No matter how disciplined I tried to be later, the tone was already set. The day felt heavy because I had entered it unprepared. Winning the morning changed that pattern completely. Winning the morning does not mean waking up at an extreme hour or forcing intensity before your body is ready. It means waking up with intention instead of avoidance. For me, the shift began with something simple. I stopped reaching for my phone the moment I woke up. That single change returned a sense of ownership over my attention. Instead of absorbing other people's priorities, I gave myself a few quiet minutes to arrive fully. That arrival mattered. It grounded me before the world began to pull. The morning is the only part of the day that truly belongs to you. Later, responsibilities compete for your focus. In the morning, there is space. That space is where discipline is built gently, not through force, but through consistency. I used that time to reflect, to breathe, to remind myself what mattered. Some mornings were productive, others were calm. Both were valuable. What mattered was that I was choosing how to begin instead of drifting into the day unconsciously. When you win the morning, you stop negotiating with yourself all day long. I noticed this immediately. Decisions became easier. I was less reactive. I had already done something aligned before external pressure appeared. That alignment created momentum, not frantic energy, but steady resolve. The day no longer felt like something to survive. It felt like something to shape. Waking up early also aligned me with natural rhythm. Morning light sharpened my thinking. Silence allowed clarity. I felt my body wake gradually instead of being shocked into motion. This gentler start reduced stress before it could accumulate. Over time, my energy stabilized. I stopped relying on urgency to function. Calm became my baseline. That calm was not passive. It was focused and ready. Winning the morning taught me the value of preparation without anxiety. I could plan my day deliberately instead of reacting to it. I could decide what deserved my best attention before distractions arrived. This planning was not rigid. It was directional. It gave the day a spine. Even when plans changed, I remained centered because I had already anchored myself internally. I also learned that mornings reveal excuses clearly. When the alarm goes off, the mind offers reasons to delay, to avoid, to postpone. Each morning becomes a small test of integrity, not perfection, but honesty. When I chose to get up despite resistance, I strengthened trust with myself. That trust carried into the rest of the day. I became someone who followed through, not just in big moments, but in quiet ones no one else saw. Winning the morning does not require complexity. It requires respect. Respect for time, respect for attention, respect for the fact that your life is shaped by how you begin more than how you intend. Small actions repeated consistently matter more than dramatic changes attempted rarely. I focused on showing up, not on being impressive. That focus created reliability. Reliability created confidence. Over time, mornings became something I looked forward to, not because they were easy, but because they were mine. They became a space where I could reconnect with purpose before distractions scattered it. I could remind myself that my worth was not determined by output alone. I could choose my mindset instead of inheriting it. That choice changed how I experienced success and failure alike. Winning the morning also improved my relationship with rest. I stopped staying up late to reclaim time I had wasted during the day. I respected sleep because I respected the morning that followed. This balance made discipline sustainable. I was no longer forcing productivity out of exhaustion. I was cooperating with my energy instead of fighting it. Your life is not changed by one decision, but by many small ones repeated daily. The morning is where those decisions are easiest to make because the noise has not yet begun. When you win the morning, you are not guaranteeing a perfect day. You are giving yourself the best possible starting position. From that position, you respond better, think clearer, and act with intention. I learned that winning the morning was never about time alone. It was about presence, being awake not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. When I showed up fully at the start of the day, everything that followed felt more deliberate. The day no longer dragged me forward. I walked into it. Win the morning, and you stop feeling like life is happening to you. You begin to feel like you are participating consciously. That shift changes everything. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily and permanently. Your life is built in these quiet hours, before anyone is watching. When you honor them, you honor yourself. And that is how winning the morning becomes winning your life. Quiet mornings changed my life in a way loud victories never did. Before I understood their power, my days began with noise, urgency, and reaction. I woke up already late in my mind, already responding to messages, already negotiating with pressure. Silence felt uncomfortable, even wasteful. I thought productivity required stimulation. What I did not realize was that noise was stealing my clarity before the day had a chance to form. Quiet mornings gave me something rare and essential: uninterrupted contact with myself. In the quiet of the morning, nothing demands immediate performance. There is no audience, no comparison, no rush to prove anything. That absence is not emptiness, it is space. And space is where awareness grows. When I sat in that stillness, I could hear my own thoughts without distortion. Not the frantic thoughts shaped by obligation, but the deeper ones shaped by values. I began to notice how much of my daily stress came from starting the day disconnected from myself. Quiet mornings restored that connection gently, without force. Silence in the morning does something the rest of the day cannot. It slows perception. Time feels wider. Thoughts arrive without collision. I noticed that decisions made in quiet carried more integrity. They were not reactive or defensive. They were considered. When I began the day quietly, I was less likely to overcommit, less likely to chase distraction, less likely to confuse urgency with importance. Quiet created discernment. Discernment protected my energy. The power of quiet mornings is not mystical. It is practical. Without constant input, the mind organizes itself. It sorts what matters from what does not. I did not need motivation in those moments. I needed honesty. Quiet removed the performance layer and revealed what I actually felt, not what I thought I should feel. Some mornings that truth was calm. Other mornings it was discomfort. Both were valuable. Facing reality early prevented it from ambushing me later. In quiet mornings, reflection becomes natural. Not forced journaling or rigid routines, but simple observation. I watched my thoughts instead of obeying them. I noticed patterns. Worries repeated themselves. Excuses revealed their shape. This awareness did not judge. It informed. Over time, that information changed how I lived. I stopped making the same unconscious choices because I could see them forming. Quiet gave me that early warning. There is a particular strength that comes from beginning the day without noise. It makes you harder to shake. When challenges appeared later, they did not feel as overwhelming. I had already established a calm center. That center became a reference point. No matter how busy the day became, I knew where to return mentally. Quiet mornings trained my nervous system to recognize safety without external reassurance. That training was invaluable. Quiet also brought humility. In silence, I could not hide behind busyness or identity. I was simply present. That presence reminded me that my worth was not measured by output alone. I could exist without performing. That realization softened my ambition without weakening it. I still worked hard, but I no longer used work to avoid myself. Quiet mornings ensured that effort came from alignment instead of escape. I learned that quiet mornings are not about doing more. They are about doing less with greater intention. Even simple actions felt different. Drinking water, stretching, breathing deeply. These acts grounded me in my body before my mind took over. That grounding reduced anxiety significantly. Anxiety thrives on abstraction. Quiet returns you to direct experience. The present moment becomes tangible again. One of the most surprising effects of quiet mornings was improved focus later in the day. By not overwhelming my senses early, I preserved mental bandwidth. I could concentrate longer without fatigue. My reactions slowed just enough to choose wisely. This was not because I tried harder, but because I started softer. Quiet created resilience by preventing overload before it began. Quiet mornings also redefined discipline for me. Discipline was no longer about force or intensity. It became about consistency and respect. Showing up to silence each morning was an act of self-respect. I was choosing clarity over distraction. That choice strengthened trust with myself. When I kept that promise, even on difficult days, my confidence grew. Not loud confidence, but quiet reliability. The world often equates silence with emptiness and noise with importance. Quiet mornings revealed the opposite. Silence was rich. Noise was draining. I became more selective with my attention throughout the day because I had tasted what clarity felt like. I was less willing to give it away. That selectivity improved my relationships, my work, and my emotional stability. Quiet mornings do not require perfection or long hours. Even a brief period of intentional silence matters. The power lies in the quality of attention, not the duration. I learned to protect that time fiercely, not out of rigidity, but out of understanding. That time shaped the rest of the day more than any plan ever did. In quiet mornings, I remembered who I was before expectations accumulated. That memory guided my actions subtly but consistently. I stopped reacting to life as if everything were urgent. I started responding as if my inner state mattered, because it did. Quiet mornings taught me that peace is not something you find after the work is done. It is something you bring with you into the work. The power of quiet mornings is simple and profound. They give you your mind back before the world tries to claim it. They allow you to begin the day from center instead of chaos. When you start from that place, your life unfolds with more clarity and less resistance. Quiet does not make life easier. It makes it truer. And from truth, strength naturally follows. If you do not plan your days, they will disappear quietly, without warning, without drama, and without mercy. I learned this not through failure, but through time slipping away unnoticed. Days felt busy, even exhausting, yet strangely empty. At night, I struggled to remember what I had actually done that mattered. Activity filled my hours, but intention was missing. Without a plan, time did not feel wasted in the moment. It only revealed itself as loss later. That realization was unsettling. It forced me to confront a simple truth. Time does not disappear suddenly. It disappears when you stop directing it. Unplanned days are deceptive. They feel free, flexible, and spontaneous. But beneath that freedom is drift. When you do not decide how your time will be used, something else decides for you. Other people's priorities, random distractions, urgent but unimportant tasks. I lived that way, For a long time, reacting instead of choosing, I told myself I was adaptable. In reality, I was unfocused. Adaptability without direction is just surrender disguised as openness. Planning your day is not about controlling every minute. It is about giving your time a spine. Without structure, even meaningful intentions collapse under pressure. I used to believe planning would make life rigid. What I discovered was the opposite. Planning created freedom. When I knew what mattered most, I could let go of everything else without guilt. I stopped being pulled in every direction because I had already chosen one. The absence of a plan creates constant decision fatigue. You wake up and immediately start negotiating. What should I do first? What deserves attention? What can wait? Each decision drains energy. By the time something important appears, your focus is already depleted. Planning removed that friction. Decisions made in advance were calmer and more honest. I was no longer bargaining with myself all day long. That mental relief was significant. Planning also exposed how easily time fragments. Short distractions multiplied. Transitions expanded. Moments dissolved into nothing. When I planned deliberately, I could see where time was leaking, not through dramatic mistakes, but through small indulgences and vague transitions. Awareness alone corrected much of it. I did not need more discipline. I needed clarity. Planning gave me that clarity. There is a difference between being busy and being effective. Busy days feel full. Effective days feel complete. Planning shifted my focus from volume to value. I stopped asking how much I could do and started asking what actually mattered. That question simplified everything. My days became quieter but more meaningful. Less crowded but more intentional. I stopped mistaking exhaustion for productivity. Planning also strengthened my sense of agency. When I planned my day, I felt involved in my own life again. Time was no longer something that happened to me. It was something I shaped. That feeling of participation improved my mood and my motivation. Even on difficult days, I knew I was moving deliberately. That knowledge created steadiness. I learned that planning works best when it is realistic. Over-planning creates pressure. Under-planning creates chaos. The balance lies in choosing a few priorities and protecting them. I stopped filling my schedule with unrealistic expectations. Instead, I focused on what deserved my best energy. Everything else became secondary. This approach reduced frustration and increased follow-through. Planning also revealed values clearly. What you schedule is what you value in practice, not in theory. When I looked honestly at my days, I saw gaps between what I claimed mattered and what I actually gave time to. Planning forced alignment. If something was important, it had to be visible in my schedule. That honesty changed my behavior more effectively than motivation ever did. Unplanned days create the illusion of movement without progress. You feel active, but nothing accumulates. Planned days create momentum. Small actions compound. Direction emerges. I began to notice that even modest efforts, when repeated consistently, produced meaningful change. Planning made consistency possible. Without it, intention remained abstract. There is also peace in knowing when to stop. Planned days include rest intentionally. Without a plan, rest feels like avoidance and creates guilt. With a plan, rest becomes recovery. That distinction matters. I stopped pushing myself unnecessarily because I could see the rhythm of effort and pause clearly. That rhythm made sustainability possible. Planning does not eliminate unpredictability. Life will interrupt. Plans will shift. The value of planning is not in rigid execution, but in orientation. When something unexpected happened, I could adjust without losing direction. Without a plan, interruptions become derailments. With a plan, they become detours. Watching days disappear is painful because you cannot retrieve them. Regret grows not from lack of success, but from lack of presence. Planning anchored me in presence. It reminded me that each day was finite and deserved attention. That awareness was not stressful. It was clarifying. I stopped postponing meaningful actions because tomorrow was no longer assumed. It was earned through how I lived today. Planning your days is an act of respect. Respect for time, respect for energy, respect for the fact that your life is being built quietly, hour by hour. When you plan, you are not trying to control life. You are choosing not to abandon it to chance. That choice makes the difference between days that vanish and days that matter. Plan your days or watch them disappear. There is no neutral option. Time will pass regardless. The only question is whether it passes through your hands with intention or slips through unnoticed. I learned to plan not to become rigid, but to become awake. And once I did, my days stopped dissolving. They began to accumulate into a life I could recognize and respect. If you love it, do not quit, especially when it becomes difficult. Difficulty is not a signal to leave. It is proof that you have reached the edge where growth begins. I learned this lesson through the quiet temptation to give up, not once, but many times. Each time the excitement faded, each time progress slowed, each time effort stopped producing visible results, the same question returned: is this still worth it? What I did not understand at first was that love does not disappear when things get hard. It is tested there. Quitting often feels logical. It wears the mask of practicality. You tell yourself you are being realistic, that maybe this path is no longer aligned, that maybe it is time to move on. Sometimes that is true, but more often, quitting is just discomfort asking to be relieved. The problem is that relief comes at a cost. Every time you quit something you love because it becomes hard, you train yourself to abandon meaning when resistance appears. Over time, that pattern hollows you out. What you love will not always love you back immediately. There will be long stretches where effort feels invisible. Passion fades into routine. Curiosity gives way to discipline. That transition is where most people stop. They mistake the end of novelty for the end of purpose. I did the same. I thought something was wrong when motivation disappeared. I did not realize that motivation was never meant to carry me all the way. Commitment was. Loving something does not mean enjoying every moment of it. It means choosing it, even when it stops being easy. It means staying when the rewards are delayed and the doubts are loud. I noticed that the moments I was most tempted to quit were the moments right before something shifted. Progress rarely announces itself. It accumulates quietly beneath the surface. Quitting interrupts that accumulation just before it becomes visible. There is a difference between resting and quitting. Rest preserves love. Quitting abandons it. I learned to pause without leaving, to slow down without walking away, to adjust without erasing the path entirely. This distinction mattered. Distinction mattered. When I allowed myself rest instead of escape, my relationship with what I loved changed. It became more honest, less idealized, but also more resilient. If you love something, it is connected to who you are becoming. Quitting it prematurely is not just abandoning an activity. It is abandoning a version of yourself that has not yet fully formed. I realized that the frustration I felt was often a sign that I was outgrowing my current capacity. The work was asking more of me, not perfection, but endurance, not intensity, but patience. The world often glorifies starting. Starting feels brave. Starting feels exciting. Quitting is framed as self-care or reinvention. Staying is rarely celebrated. Staying is quiet. Staying is lonely. Staying requires faith in something you cannot yet prove. But staying is where depth is built. Depth cannot be rushed. It is earned through repetition, failure, correction, and return. When I stayed with what I loved through difficult seasons, I discovered something unexpected. My confidence grew, not because I was succeeding constantly, but because I was no longer running from discomfort. I could trust myself to remain present when things were uncertain. That trust spilled into other areas of my life. I stopped abandoning goals prematurely. I stopped doubting my ability to endure. I became steadier. Loving something also means redefining success. Early on, success feels external. Recognition, results, approval. Over time, success becomes internal. Integrity, craft, growth. When I shifted my definition, quitting lost much of its appeal. I was no longer chasing validation. I was building competence. That process required time. Quitting would have reset everything I had already invested. There were moments when quitting felt necessary, even urgent. In those moments, I learned to ask better questions. Am I tired or am I done? Am I afraid or am I misaligned? Am I avoiding growth or protecting my well-being? These questions slowed my reaction. Often, the urge to quit passed once I rested, reflected, or adjusted expectations. Love returned when pressure eased. If you love it, do not quit because it no longer feels magical. Magic fades, so meaning can deepen. If you quit every time the feeling changes, you will never experience mastery, contribution, or quiet pride. You will remain a beginner forever, always starting, never arriving. Staying does not mean suffering endlessly. It means choosing wisely, adjusting honestly, and continuing deliberately. It means understanding that frustration is part of the process, not evidence against it. When I embraced this, I stopped treating difficulty as a personal failure. I treated it as information. What needs to change? What needs to strengthen? What needs patience? The things you love shape you. They challenge your weaknesses and refine your strengths. Quitting removes that pressure, but it also removes that shaping. Over time, avoiding challenge leads to stagnation. Staying leads to growth, even when growth is uncomfortable. If you love it, do not quit when it stops loving you back in obvious ways. Love matures through commitment. Passion becomes practice. Inspiration becomes discipline. What remains is quieter, but far more powerful. It is rooted. I stayed. And because I stayed, I learned who I was when things were not easy. That knowledge became one of my greatest assets. It reminded me that I could endure uncertainty without losing direction, that I could keep going without constant reassurance, that I could build something meaningful slowly. If you love it, do not quit. Pause, reflect, adjust, rest, but stay. The version of you that exists on the other side of perseverance is not accessible any other way. Kindness is strength, not weakness, and I learned that only after misunderstanding it for most of my life. I once believed that kindness made you vulnerable, that it invited disrespect, that it meant lowering your guard in a world that rewards toughness. I thought strength meant hardness, emotional distance, and the ability to remain unaffected. What that version of strength actually produced was isolation and constant tension. I was armored, but exhausted. It took time to realize that real strength does not come from closing yourself off. It comes from choosing how you show up, even when it would be easier to withdraw. Kindness requires control. That truth is often ignored. Anyone can be harsh when they are frustrated. Anyone can be indifferent when they are overwhelmed. Kindness asks more of you. It asks you to regulate your emotions, to pause before reacting, to see another human being instead of just an obstacle. I noticed that the moments when I chose kindness were the moments when I felt most grounded. Not weaker, but steadier. I was not giving my power away. I was exercising it deliberately. There is a false belief that kindness means letting people cross your boundaries. That is not kindness. That is avoidance. True kindness includes clarity and firmness. I learned that I could be respectful without being passive, compassionate without being permissive. Saying no calmly is kinder than saying yes resentfully. Speaking honestly without cruelty takes more courage than silence. Kindness, when practiced correctly, is not soft. It is precise. I began to notice how much energy aggression consumed. Anger demanded attention. Resentment replayed itself endlessly. Harshness felt powerful in the moment but left a residue that lingered. Kindness, on the other hand, was efficient. It resolved situations faster. It de-escalated conflict. It allowed me to move on without carrying emotional weight. Strength is not just about impact. It is about recovery. Kindness accelerated recovery. Choosing kindness also changed how I saw myself. When I acted with integrity under pressure, my self-respect increased. I trusted myself more. I no longer needed to justify my behavior later. There was no internal cleanup required. That internal alignment mattered. It created confidence that did not depend on dominance or approval. I knew who I was being, and that clarity was stabilizing. Kindness is often misunderstood as weakness because it does not announce itself loudly. It does not intimidate. It does not demand recognition. But quiet strength lasts longer than force. I observed that the people who consistently chose kindness were the ones others trusted, returned to, and respected over time. Not because they were agreeable, but because they were reliable. Reliability is a form of strength few people cultivate. There were moments when kindness felt costly, when someone misunderstood it, when it was not reciprocated. In those moments, I questioned my choice. But I noticed something important. Even when kindness was not rewarded externally, it preserved my inner stability. I did not spiral into bitterness. I did not rehearse arguments in my head. I stayed clear. That clarity was worth more than winning any interaction. Kindness also disarmed situations that force never could. I watched tension dissolve when I refused to escalate, not by surrendering, but by staying composed. Kindness removed the fuel from conflict. It shifted the dynamic. That shift was not accidental. It was strategic. Remaining calm and respectful under pressure is one of the most powerful positions you can occupy. I also learned that kindness toward yourself is foundational. Self-criticism masquerades as discipline, but it erodes resilience. When I replaced harsh self-talk with honest but compassionate assessment, my growth accelerated. I could correct mistakes without shame. I could improve without self-punishment. That internal kindness made external kindness easier. You cannot sustainably give what you refuse to offer yourself. The strongest people I know are not the loudest or the most intimidating. They are the most centered. They respond instead of react. They listen without collapsing. They act without cruelty. Kindness is the outward expression of that inner stability. It signals confidence, not insecurity. When you are secure, you do not need to dominate. You can afford to be generous. Choosing kindness does not mean you will never face conflict. It means you face it without losing yourself. It means you do not outsource your behavior to someone else's dysfunction. That is strength. Maintaining your values under pressure requires discipline. Kindness is disciplined humanity. I stopped viewing kindness as something extra and started seeing it as essential. Essential to leadership, essential to connection, essential to peace of mind. The world does not need more aggression disguised as confidence. It needs more people who are strong enough to remain humane when it would be easier not to be. Kindness is strength because it requires awareness, restraint, and courage. It is easy to harden. It is difficult to stay open without becoming fragile. That balance is where true power lives. When you choose kindness deliberately, you are not yielding ground. You are standing firmly in who you are. Once I understood this, I stopped apologizing for being kind. I stopped equating sharpness with intelligence and coldness with control. I became more effective, not less, more respected, not ignored. Kindness did not weaken me. It clarified me. If you want to know how strong you truly are, pay attention to how you treat others when you are tired, pressured, or misunderstood. That is where strength is revealed. And when you choose kindness there, you will discover that it is not a liability. It is one of the most reliable forms of power you will ever develop. Say yes, disconnect, and live fully. These three actions sound simple, almost casual, yet they are among the most resisted choices in modern life. I know because I resisted them myself. I said no out of habit, stayed connected out of fear, and lived partially while telling myself I was being responsible. I thought caution was wisdom and constant availability was commitment. What I was really doing was shrinking my life to fit inside comfort and screens. Living fully required something different. It required courage, boundaries, and presence. Saying yes changed my trajectory in quiet ways. Not reckless yes, not people-pleasing yes, but conscious yes. Yes to experiences that stretched me. Yes to conversations that felt slightly uncomfortable. Yes to opportunities I did not feel fully ready for. Each time I said yes, I discovered that readiness often follows action, not the other way around. Waiting to feel confident kept me stagnant. Saying yes moved me forward. Life did not open up because I was prepared. It opened up because I was willing. I noticed that many of my no responses were rooted in fear disguised as preference. Fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, fear of inconvenience. Saying yes forced those fears into the open. Once visible, they lost much of their power. I learned that discomfort was not a threat. It was an invitation. Each yes expanded my tolerance for uncertainty and strengthened my trust in myself. I became less dependent on perfect conditions and more confident in my ability to adapt. At the same time, learning to disconnect was essential. Constant connection fractured my attention and diluted my experiences. I was everywhere and nowhere at once. Even when I said yes to life, I was half present, divided between the moment and the device in my hand. Disconnecting felt uncomfortable at first. Silence exposed restlessness. Stillness revealed how addicted I had become to distraction. But beyond that, discomfort was clarity. When I disconnected, my senses returned. Conversations deepened. Moments slowed. Life regained texture. Disconnecting did not mean abandoning responsibility. It meant reclaiming attention. I learned to choose when and how I engaged, instead of reacting constantly. Without the noise of notifications, my thoughts organized themselves. I could reflect without interruption. I could enjoy without documenting. I could be with people without splitting my focus. This presence made experiences richer. Time felt fuller. Days felt lived instead of consumed. Saying yes and disconnecting work together. Saying yes opens doors. Disconnecting allows you to walk through them fully. Without disconnecting, yes becomes superficial. You attend without absorbing. You participate without remembering. I realized that many of my memories were vague because I had never fully arrived. Disconnecting allowed experiences to leave an imprint. That imprint mattered. It gave life continuity and meaning. Living fully is not about chasing intensity. It is about depth. Depth requires presence. Presence requires boundaries. Boundaries require intention. I stopped treating availability as virtue and started treating attention as a resource. This shift changed my relationships. People felt heard. I felt engaged. Interactions were no longer rushed or fragmented. Even ordinary moments carried weight when I was fully there. I also learned that saying yes sometimes means saying no to noise, no to endless scrolling, no to constant updates, no to being reachable at all times. These no responses protected my yes responses. They preserved energy for what mattered. Living fully is not about adding more. It is about subtracting what distracts. Disconnecting created that subtraction naturally. There was a fear that disconnecting would make me fall behind or miss out. What actually happened was the opposite. I stopped missing my own life. I became more responsive, not less. More intentional, not isolated. Opportunities did not disappear because I was offline for a while. They became clearer because I was attentive when they appeared. Saying yes also applied internally. Yes to rest. Yes to honesty. Yes to acknowledging what I wanted instead of what was expected. Disconnecting helped me hear that inner voice again. Without constant external input, my own preferences surfaced. Living fully required alignment, not accumulation. I stopped outsourcing my sense of direction to trends and opinions. Living fully is demanding in a quiet way. It asks you to be present when it would be easier to escape, to engage when avoidance is tempting, to choose depth over distraction repeatedly. This is not dramatic. It is daily. But these daily choices compound. They build a life that feels inhabited rather than endured. I noticed that joy became more frequent when I disconnected. Not explosive joy, but steady contentment. My nervous system relaxed. I was no longer overstimulated and undernourished at the same time. Calm replaced restlessness. That calm made saying yes easier because I was not already exhausted. Say yes to what expands you. Disconnect from what fragments you. Live fully by being where you are. This is not a slogan. It is a discipline. One that requires repetition and forgiveness. You will reconnect by habit sometimes. You will say no out of fear occasionally. The point is not perfection. It is awareness. Living fully does not require a new life. It requires a new relationship with the one you already have. When you say yes with intention, disconnect with purpose, and show up with presence, life responds, not with constant pleasure, but with meaning. And meaning is what sustains you when excitement fades. I stopped waiting for the right moment to live fully. I stopped assuming it would arrive later. Later is never guaranteed. Presence is. Say yes while you can. Disconnect while you must. Live fully while you are here. This is not about doing more. It is about being awake for what is already unfolding. This is your life, not a rehearsal, not a draft, not something waiting to begin later. I am saying this to you directly because I once lived as if time were generous and chances were infinite. I postponed presence. I delayed courage. I treated my days like placeholders instead of the substance of my existence. Nothing dramatic was wrong, yet something essential was missing. I was alive, but I was not fully living. The moment I understood that truth, everything sharpened. Life stopped being an abstract concept and became a responsibility I could no longer avoid. You do not need permission to start living. You do not need perfect clarity, perfect timing, or perfect confidence. Waiting for those things is how life quietly slips away. I waited for certainty and called it preparation. In reality, It was fear refined into patience. Living begins when you act without guarantees, when you move despite uncertainty, when you accept that clarity often follows commitment instead of preceding it. Your life does not start when conditions improve. It starts when you decide to engage honestly with where you are. I learned that most regret does not come from failure. It comes from neglect, from moments you avoided, from truths you delayed, from choices you postponed because they felt uncomfortable. Comfort is seductive because it feels safe, but it rarely feels alive. Life expands at the edges of what you are willing to face. Each time you choose avoidance, that edge recedes. Each time you choose presence, it advances. Living is not about intensity. It is about participation. This is your life means ownership. No one else is responsible for how awake you are within it. Circumstances influence you, but they do not define your engagement. I spent years blaming conditions for my dissatisfaction. When things changed, the dissatisfaction remained. Only when I took responsibility for my attention, my choices, and my courage did life begin to feel substantial. Ownership is not heavy. It is freeing. It returns agency to where it belongs. Starting now does not require dramatic reinvention. It requires honesty in small moments. Speak when you would normally stay silent. Rest when you would normally push. Say no when yes would betray you. Say yes when fear is the only reason you hesitate. These choices seem insignificant in isolation, but they accumulate into a life that feels lived from the inside instead of observed from a distance. I discovered that living fully meant abandoning the fantasy of later. Later is an illusion that keeps you compliant. Later assumes time will wait and energy will remain. Neither is guaranteed. Now is the only moment that offers leverage. When you act now, you shape momentum. When you delay, momentum shapes you. This is not pressure, it is clarity. Your life is happening in ordinary moments, not just milestones. If you keep waiting for meaning to arrive through achievement, you will miss the meaning embedded in attention, presence, and choice. I stopped chasing significance and started practicing awareness. Meaning followed naturally, not loudly, but consistently. Life became richer without becoming easier. Starting now also means forgiving yourself for the time you feel you have wasted. Carrying regret forward only compounds loss. The past cannot be corrected by self-punishment. It can only be redeemed by engagement. The moment you show up fully, the past loosens its grip. You do not owe yesterday your future. You owe today your attention. This is your life, means you are allowed to change. You are not required to remain loyal to outdated versions of yourself. Growth will ask you to release identities that once felt necessary. That release can feel like loss, but it is actually alignment. Living fully requires flexibility. You are not betraying who you were. You are responding to who you are becoming. I learned that fear never disappears before action. It quiets during action. Waiting for confidence is a misunderstanding of how courage works. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. Each time you act despite fear, you expand your capacity. Life meets you at that expansion. This is your life also means rest is not laziness. Presence requires energy. You cannot stay awake in your life if you are constantly depleted. Honoring your limits is not quitting, it is sustainability. I stopped glorifying exhaustion and started valuing clarity. The quality of my attention improved immediately. Living fully became possible because I was no longer running from myself. You do not need to solve your entire life to start living it. You need to engage with the next honest step. That step may be small, it may be uncomfortable, it may be quiet. Take it anyway. Momentum does not care about scale. It responds to sincerity. I am not offering you inspiration. I am offering you a reminder. You are already in your life. There is no threshold to cross, no arrival point to reach. There is only the choice to be present or absent. Each moment asks the same question. Are you here? Or are you waiting? This is your life. Start living it now. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but deliberately. Choose presence over postponement. Choose courage over comfort. Choose engagement over observation. You do not need to become someone else. You need to show up as you are, where you are, while you still can. Life does not announce when it is slipping away. It whispers through routine and distraction. Listen carefully, then act. Begin, stay, adjust, continue. This is not practice. This is it.